Everything around us has a price. Said price is ever-changing, and even today, cars, houses, electronics, and just about everything else cost a lot more. When the general price levels in a country rise, it's called inflation. And clearly, we've experienced a significant amount of inflation over the past century. But what exactly is inflation? Inflation is defined as a sustained increase in the general level of price for goods and services in a country, and is measured as an annual percentage change. Under conditions of inflation, the price of things rise over time. Put differently, as inflation rises, every dollar you own buys a smaller percentage of a good or a service. When prices rise, and alternatively, when the value of money falls, we have inflation. The value of a dollar is expressed in terms of its purchasing power, which is the amount of real tangible goods or actual services that money can buy at a given moment in time. Once again, when inflation goes up, there is a decline in the purchasing power of money. For example, if the inflation rate is 2% annually, then theoretically, a dollar worth of candy in 1 year will cost $1.02. Sadly, after inflation, your dollar does not go as far as it did in the past. But what causes inflation? There are a couple of theories about this. The first one being demand-pull inflation. This theory states that inflation is caused by the overall increase in the demand for goods and services, which bids up their price. This theory can be summarized as too much money chasing too few goods. In other words, if demand is growing faster than supply, prices will increase. This usually occurs in rapidly growing economies. Another theory is the cost-push inflation. This theory states that inflation is caused when companies' cost of production go up. When this happens, they need to increase the prices to maintain their profit margins. Increased cost can include things such as wages, taxes, or increased cost of natural resources, or even imports. A third theory is called monetary inflation. This theory states that inflation is caused by an oversupply of money in the economy. Just like any other commodity, the prices of things are determined by their supply and demand. If there is too much supply, the prices of things go down. But what if we're talking about money? An excess supply of money makes its value go down. The result is that the prices of everything else must go up. So what are the costs of inflation? Inflation affects different people in different ways, with some benefiting from its effects at the expense of someone who loses out. It also depends on whether the changes of the rate of inflation are anticipated or unanticipated. If the inflation rate corresponds to what the majority of people are expecting, then we can compensate. And the impact isn't necessarily as severe. For example, banks can vary their interest rates, and workers can negotiate contracts that include automatic wage hikes as prices go up. Let's see some examples of that. Suppose a bank issues you a 30-year mortgage to buy a house at a fixed interest rate of 5% per year, costing $1,000 per month. As inflation rises, the cost of that $1,000 per month decreases. This, of course, benefits the homeowner, especially if the rate of inflation exceeds the interest rate of the loan. Let's see another example. Workers with fixed salaries or contracts that do not adjust with inflation will be hurt as their purchasing power of their income stays the same relative to the rising prices. So is inflation a good or a bad thing? A modest inflation is a sign that the economy is growing. The lack of inflation may be an indication that the economy is weakening. In some situations, little inflation can be just as bad as high inflation. As you can see, it's not as easy to label inflation as either good or a bad. It depends on the overall economy as well as your personal situation.
Who measures inflation? It is government statisticians. In US, they are from the Bureau of Labor and Statistics. How is inflation measured? Here are some steps. First, we put together a lot of goods and products that represent the economy into a market basket and categorize them, such as clothing, food, car, mobile phones, etc. Second, we choose a starting year as a base to compare. For example, 1913 is the chosen base year and the index number is 100. Third, we compare the price change of the items in the market basket over time. For example, assume a car costs $1,000 in 1913, $1,500 in 1923, and $2,000 in 1933. Finally, we choose a price index method such as CPI, Consumer Price Index, to calculate the result and compare to the base index. Using CPI's formula, we can get the following result. For 1913, the base index is 100. For 1923, the index is 150. And for 1933, the index is 200. These numbers represent the cost of the market basket as a percentage of the cost of the identical basket in the starting year. What are two main inflation index measurements in the US? One is Consumer Price Index, so-called CPI, just as mentioned. It is a measure of price changes in consumer goods and services, which is from the perspective of purchasers. The other is Producer Price Index, called PPI. It is a family of indexes that measure the average change over time in selling prices received by domestic producers of goods and services, which is from the perspective of sellers. The PPI is interpreted similar to CPI, but with some differences. The first difference is targeted goods and services. PPI targets the whole output of all producers, including the goods and services not only bought by producers for operation or investment, but also bought by consumers from retail sellers and directly from producers. CPI targets goods and services bought by US urban residents. The second difference is their prices. For PPI, sales and taxes are not included because the factors do not directly benefit producers, while CPI includes sales and taxes because they directly impact consumers. The third difference is that they show different aspects of economic activities. PPI is more for the real growth, while CPI is more for the cost of living.
Inflation and interest rates. Let's have a look at the model ADAS that points out the relation between inflation and real product. Interest rates influence planned aggregate demand, therefore central bank can in the short run thanks to the changes of interest rates influence real product or inflation. Central bank tries to achieve maximum employment, stable prices and a good level of growth. As interest rates drop, consumer spending increase, and this in turn stimulates economic growth, which can spur inflation. Very quick growth might result in hyperinflation. However, economy with no inflation has essentially stagnated and can experience a deflationary spiral. Real interest rate equals inflation minus inflation expectation. It means central bank does its decision according to the real inflation as well as according to the expected inflation. Fisher's effect puts together nominal and real interest rate with expected inflation rate. The real interest rate is the higher the lower the inflation rate we expect. As interest rates drop, inflation rate grows up. Central bank raise up nominal as well as real consumption, investment, government expenses, and net export that are negatively dependent on real interest rates. Therefore, central bank increases interest rates to follow targets of their monetary policy. Growing inflation increases inflation expectation. Higher inflation because of production gap and economy above its potential influence expectation of companies, household, and government would all expect higher inflation in the future. Therefore, central banks will use aggregate expenditures. In case of slowing inflation, central bank can ease monetary policy, decrease real interest rate, and revitalize planned spending. Central bank has to increase real interest rate to diminish total aggregate expenditure, inflation rate, and inflation expectations. Inflation and unemployment. There exists a substitute effect or trade-off between inflation and unemployment. Growth of inflation leads to decrease in unemployment rate. But why? The explanation can be provided by Philip curve. Original Philip curve described in 1958 says there is an exact level of unemployment that is connected with stability of nominal wages. It means it doesn't cause changes in nominal wages. The unemployment rate that is characterized by stability of nominal wages we can call the natural rate of unemployment or rate of unemployment that doesn't accelerate inflation neighborhood. Unemployment rate we can describe as deviation between real and natural rate of unemployment according to this equation, where coefficient A represents the sensitivity of growth rate of nominal wages to deviation between real and natural rate of unemployment. On the graph, the left side of the graph symbolizes growth rate of nominal wages. If real unemployment is lower than natural rate, it causes higher growth rate of nominal wages. In the 1960s, Hsu and Samuelson modified the original Philip curve and the growth rate of nominal wages exchanged for inflation rate. It means natural unemployment rate is connected with zero inflation rate. Lower unemployment than natural unemployment rate leads to growth of inflation. Why it leads to increase in prices? With expansion of aggregate demand, there is a positive production gap that leads to demand for labor to produce more. If the demand for labor is higher than offer of labor, it results in higher wages. However, if the growth of nominal wages doesn't lead to more productivity, it results in higher production costs. Companies almost never diminish their revenues, and therefore these imbalances in the labor market lead to growth of prices. They lead to inflation.
Do you ever wonder how inflation will impact your investments? Let's examine some of the most popular investments for general publics: cash, stock, bond, house, and gold. Since you always have to stage some cash before making any investment, let's talk about cash first. What will happen to cash during inflation? Remember, inflation is a synonym of loss of purchasing power. It's not difficult to guess a pile of cash will worth much less during inflation. In other words, there are better choices than saving money in your bank account. Better choices than saving? It must be bond, since the default rate of government and investment-grade bonds are almost zero, and bonds bear higher rates than saving account. Not exactly true if inflation is taken into consideration. Assume the YTM of your bond is 3%, while inflation is 4%, then the real return of investment on bond is actually minus 1%. If bond is not working, then maybe stock would do the trick. Assume you spend your saving to buy the share of some company. Will inflation eat your investment in stock? The answer is no, because in the long run, companies' revenue and earnings are generally increased at a similar path as inflation. In fact, companies like Yahoo may look more like Facebook because their revenue is bloated by inflation. Besides bond and stock, another widespread investment target is gold. The scarcity of gold mines makes gold a perfect store of value whose price is resistant to inflation. The value of gold is recognized not only at every corner of the world, but also lasts across human history. No wonder there are stories about discovering gold coins underneath grandma's bed. Among other investments, for most of us, house is probably the most significant one. The money you have to spend on a house is so large that we could easily lose our sleep if it depreciates for any reason. And inflation goes up, thankfully, the price of your house generally goes up too, since the price of materials used to build a house become more expensive. Disclaimer: the opinions expressed in this video do not constitute investment advice, and independent advice should be sought where appropriate. Thank you.
Conclusion. What did we learn about inflation? After we've heard so many things about this topic, the question still remains: is inflation good or bad for us? The answer to this question is fairly simple, and I will explain why. You should know now that inflation is neither good nor bad for us because its impact depends on the personal situation of every individual. Nevertheless, we want you to finish the video with some key takeaways about inflation. Firstly, what is inflation? After this video, you should know that inflation represents an increase in general level of prices for goods and services. Secondly, when inflation happens and prices go up, it automatically means that the value of money declines. Thirdly, inflation can be measured with a price index. The most common forms are Consumer Price Index and the Producer Price Index. Fourthly, variations on inflations include disinflation, deflation, hyperinflation, and stagflation. Fifth, be very careful. Inflation can pose a serious problem for fixed income investors. It is therefore extremely important to understand that nominal interest rates are not the same as real interest rates. Sixthly, when we have inflation and there's an increase in prices, what to do? You can invest in stock, gold, or housing. This will make you a happy investor that keeps its money valuable. And with this, we would like to send you on your way. This is the end of our inflation story. Thank you for watching.